Thank you again to Mrs. Gurland for sitting down with me and discussing global supply chain and sharing some of her experiences with procuring supplies for global companies, working in a manufacturing facility, and being a woman in supply chain, along with how to succeed as being a woman in supply chain. For more episodes and sit downs, you can visit my podcast page, Stephanie's Supply Chain Sit Downs on Spotify. Thank you for listening and see you in the next episode.
So I was wondering if you could explain the different supply chain roles that you've held throughout your career, and any roles that you've held that, yeah. that are
Okay,
kind of relevant.
so I'm gonna get something because I think a visual for you is important.
Okay.
So I've been in the supply chain in a little bit of an odd role, more as a general manager of a manufacturing facility. And also on the sales side, supply chain touches everything. I deal with supply chain 24/7. So from the manufacturing side, let's go through the phases really in when you make a product. So I was in the underwear business, literally making the company I worked for, an Israeli company, made underwear for Victoria's Secret, Donna Karan, and all those companies in the US. I was on the sales side, but from the supply chain side, I dealt with the logistics of bringing the product over here. Supply chain also includes planning, right? So the customer says, I want, this is a perfect example. We would have an order from Victoria's Secret. They would place a purchase order, right? Then we would go to manufacture it. And then every Monday, Victoria's Secret would look at their sales from the weekend and call us up and say, nah, this sold more. The pink underwear sold more than the orange underwear. So now change what you're producing for us. So from a supply chain, the planning is crucial upfront. So I was very involved in that. So I think when you look at supply chain, there are supply chain roles like you're talking about, like directly, but everyone in that makes a product is in supply chain. So it's another way to look at it. So I met a woman yesterday that was a package engineer that designed boxes, and they moved her literally from her company to supply chain, working with the suppliers because she understood how the product was made. So you can start in supply chain and go and stay in supply chain, or you can start in other things and end up in supply chain, just so you know, from a career point of view.
Yeah.
So you have the planning side, you have the product side. After being in the underwear business and dealing with that, I moved to an Israeli farm tire company. So think those big, giant farm tires on tractors. And there, when you look at supply chain, you have, again, manufacturing, you have forecasting. What do you think the customer is going to order? Then it's logistics in any of these jobs of getting the raw materials in. So if a customer places an order, then you have the whole issue of getting the product in, and you have to get all the raw materials. Then you have to make it. Then you have to ship it. We would ship container loads of tires from Israel to the United States, like 40 container loads a month. So supply chain also includes how do you get farm tires that are all different sizes into a container and get it fit. So everyone from the person making the product to the guy shoving it in the container to the logistics person getting it through customs, to which I was all involved in. So in my role, I was manager of the office in the US. So in that role as manager, even though again my title did not include supply chain, I was involved in the supply chain every day, because if a container didn't get on, I deal with it. If we weren't sure how to fit the tires in the container, they'd say, what tires should we take out? So all day long, I was dealing with supply chain. And so then I went from there. And it's also interesting, you know, being a woman in, you know, which we could talk about later, being a woman in supply chain. From there, I went to a packaging company. So when I say packaging, I have to show you a sample. Can you see this? It's a bottle. Yes. So when I say packaging, there's primary, which is like a container that the product goes in. And there's something called secondary, which is the pretty label that I'm showing you right now. For 17 years, I worked for an Israeli packaging company. We had factories in Israel, the United States, South Africa, and Russia. I was in sales, and then I moved to run the factory in the United States. I was general manager of the factory in the United States. So in my role as general manager, everything I did was supply chain. One, it was making sure we got the raw materials. Two, making sure that we got the raw materials into our place. So that would be inks and the sticker material that would go on, a lamination to go on it, and all that kind of stuff. So the supply chain was talking to the customers, what do you need? When do you need it? Getting the raw materials to make it, making it, shipping it, getting to them. Oh, and then by the way, when there's a quality issue, supply chain is you shut our production. So imagine we send a label and the label's not working and we shut the production line down. And that's all supply chain. One of the best stories I have experience wise, you know, Fiji water.
Yes.
Do you know Fiji water is actually bottled in Fiji?
Oh, wow.
Not only is it bottled in Fiji, the labels from Fiji water for 15 years were made in Israel and shipped from Israel to Fiji. The bottles were made in the Fiji water plant. They actually bought plastic pellets that they exploded into a bottle, but the labels were logistically sent from Israel. So when you talk about supply chain, so the company I worked for, my salesperson and I helped sell that when I was the general manager, but we didn't have the equipment to make that label in the United States. So we sent the labels from Israel to Fiji. When you talk about supply chain, the materials were coming in from all over. The labels were produced in Israel. They were put on a container. And because imagine this, Israel to Fiji, the temperature on the ships was changing. We had to put a temperature gauge in each container to track the temperature of the labels to make sure the labels didn't melt. That's supply chain. So there's so much going on in supply chain day in and day out. And then Fiji would take the labels, put them on the bottle, put the water in, and literally what they say is the water doesn't touch air. It doesn't touch air. It literally doesn't. I saw it for myself. It's the coolest thing. Then they fill the bottle, right? Put the caps on, they fill the bottle, and then they ship all over the world. All over the world. That's all supply chain. So all that stuff is supply chain. So, all right. Any other questions? I have
No.
other stories here, but that's
No, yeah, that was really cool. That's really interesting as well. I
yeah,
didn't realize like that was like that took so much, and I didn't realize that they were like bottled there and then sent from Fiji. I thought it was like the water was like procured there and then sent to some factory somewhere else.
no. And what's cool about that company, I admire them because they employ a lot of people in Fiji, and then they help them with education and support their families. They're really, really philanthropic family. Actually, it's a Jewish family from Passaic that owns Fiji Water, pomegranate juice, and a couple other companies.
Wow.
So, yeah,
Really interesting.
yeah.
I was wondering what has been like one of the most challenging things you've had to deal with, like supply chain wise throughout your career, and then like how did you overcome it?
That's a great question, and I have a really COVID. So the company I worked for, so I was with the Israeli packaging company for 17 years. When the owner died, I left, and now I was with a company for 5.5 years that makes labels, same type of thing. And we had factories in Puerto Rico and in Philadelphia. I left there a few months ago, and I'll tell you about that because that's an interesting story. But during COVID, we always made labels for Johnson and Johnson for their Janssen division for some of their medicines. One of the medicines was for cancer, and another medicine was for ADHD. And all of a sudden, we got a call from our material supplier, so think the sticker material, saying, we can't send you the material. And we're like, why? They couldn't get the adhesive. Why couldn't they get the glue? Because there were trees in some country that the glue was coming from that they couldn't get anymore. And now we couldn't get labels to Johnson & Johnson. I was asked to be on a call with the head of global procurement for the Johnson & Johnson pharmaceutical division with myself our CEO, and I dragged the material supplier onto the call. Now, I had warned J&J there was a problem, but their staff person like sort of dropped the ball, and I didn't follow up with him because I did once, and then I'm like, you know what, whatever. So all of a sudden, crashing, no labels, and the head of J&J procurement says, "You are creating a global crisis. We will no longer be able to bring this cancer drug or this ADHD medicine to market, and I don't think you understand what that means." Now, my company was a $60 million company. You're talking the head of all Janssen, which is a J&J divisions, pharmaceuticals, saying that to me.
Wow.
And here's my answer. And if you don't think I was every Friday night and Saturday or every weekend working on this for months, I said to the woman, I said, actually, I do know because my son is on ADHD medicine. And I know if he can't get medicine, what a problem it is. And you can't just switch medicines. So you have my personal commitment that I will do everything in my power to fix this. And then they, yelled and screamed at my supplier, but then they didn't yell and scream. They just told them the significance of it. And then I was hounding our supplier so much high up in their food chain. And one day the supplier called me up and said, "Leslie, if I get this material for you, will the problem go away?" This is after about 3 weeks. And I said, "You mean, will I stop being a complete pest and pain in your ass?" And he laughed. He said, "Yes." And I said, "Yes." And I said, "I will never pull another favor from you again." And they got me the material. We had to get a special thing to get a special permission to do about 1,000 labels that wasn't from that material for an emergency. But other than that, we got them the material. And
Wow.
I never asked the supplier. So when this customer a couple of other times was not giving me information, I said, I don't have another silver bullet to go to our material supplier, so you have to forecast better. So that was, I think, the hardest thing I ever had to deal with. And I also took it very personally. It just, because people's lives were at stake. It wasn't, we make vitamin labels, we make labels for food. Okay. But when you're talking a life-saving drug, a cancer drug, and you sit there, there are days I can say, "Oh, it's a sticker. Why do I care? It's a Friday night. I'm giving up Shabbat to deal with this." But the other side of it, very seriously, is I was involved in saving lives. And then 3 months ago, I left that company, the packaging company. We were bought by a $3.2 billion company. And I couldn't move things. They're a great company. But I wanted to be where I have more ability to move things along. And I'm now with another company that makes same thing, labels. We have 8 factories. One, I was out in California visiting one of our customers. I wasn't here during COVID, and they told us a story that they were on the phone with it also was a COVID drug, COVID testing kits we were making labels for. And they said that every 2 weeks they were on the phone with the White House. And that we supply labels so quickly. They wrote us a letter. I have a copy of it. They were working with the White House and we were working with them. Like that's supply chain at its best. Like when you know that you're helping. So we didn't invent the vaccine, but every person, the guy making if you talk to anyone that worked in manufacturing during COVID, people coming in with masks, people, it wasn't just the doctors and the nurses. Going and working in factories day in and day out when everyone else was home, when your kids were home and you couldn't be with. I mean, people in manufacturing, whether it was a food plant, a drug plant, whatever, it was not an easy time at all. So I think that was hard for me and a lot of people.
Well, I'm glad that you were able to figure out the whole label thing with Johnson and Johnson or the
Yeah,
Janssen division.
yeah,
That's really cool that you were able to do that and get it
yeah,
fixed. And obviously the impact was huge as well.
yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool that you were able to do that and all that. I guess I have one other main question to kind of ask you. Well, two, I guess. Where do you think like supply chain and like the supply chain industry is going to go in like 5 to 10 years, like especially with like all the AI coming up as well?
It's interesting. I think that supply chain has just gone through such an incredible time that people in it are just so because of so on a I'll get to AI in a minute. What that whole shift has changed supply chain already in the fact that anyone in supply chain is always looking now at having secondary sources. So you're not going to buy labels one company. And when I go to make a label for a new customer, I say I want to have two different materials. So God forbid I can't get a material, I could always supply you. So the way people in supply chain look at contingency is completely different than it was. That's already shifted. And the key shift there is to keep that front of mind. Don't forget it, because you can have another crisis. As far as AI, I'm a little bit older. I am not sure where that's going because I'm not as involved, but I assume it will have some impact. I'm just not sure where. I
That's
think
fair.
guys, like when you look at supply chain in terms of Amazon, they're probably all over it in ways that I don't know. We're not there yet. Although it's interesting that you're saying that because I think where people are using AI now, and Unilever is starting. I heard it. They're using it in their production planning.
Wow.
So, or they're doing a beta test on it now. So I think AI will be definitely used by people like Amazon, but I think from what I hear, it's going to be used in planning. I just don't know how.
That makes
I would love,
sense.
like, we're not big enough to, and I don't have a tech geek with me that would come and say, this is how we should use AI, but it's going to be interesting. It'll change the world for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then I know earlier you also mentioned like being a woman in supply chain. Like, what is your best advice for like women in supply chain and anyone like the supply chain industry who's a woman?
As a woman, I think women are have such a unique opportunity in supply chain. I think women's skill set of organizational skills are critical. I think women can bring a different voice, more of a collaborative voice. I think sometimes, though, the challenge is if you're tough like I am, I'm sometimes called a pit bull, where a guy would just be assertive and you just whatever. And a lot of times I'm in the room with all men or one other woman. And I never, this is a funny story. One time when I was running the factory, my ops manager was a woman, my quality manager was a woman, myself, and then 4 guys from Frito-Lay came to visit, all men in suits, and 3 women across the table, and they were squirming. They didn't know what to do with that. And I could see it. They were like, and I'm like, you've never, I said, what's going on? I'm like, are you surprised that there are 3 women across from you? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, okay. Like, so it was a riot. Now, if you're in other industries, you may not see that, but you're going to see that. But I think we have a good voice. And I think what you do as a young person coming in is you latch on to women that can mentor you. I also, when you go to seminars, I got to meet Amgen. I don't know if you know Amgen. It's a big drug company, like gazillion dollars, a couple of billion. They have a factory in Puerto Rico and they have a factory in California, and they're building one in Ohio. And when I was the woman that runs there's a woman running the factory in Puerto Rico. And I got to meet her. It was like a rock star moment for me. It's about 6 months ago. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm in the room. And I'm 60, and she may even be younger than me, a little older, but she runs a factory, one of the biggest drug plants in the world. And I got to sit next to her and I said, we're honored to be your supplier and whatever. And then I actually wrote her an email and I connected with her on LinkedIn and she wrote me back. And I was like, I told her this is like a rock star moment for me, like rather meet her than Pink, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
She was just so powerful. So I think you be who you are. I think women have a lot to offer, and I think you network, and and learn from other women and look for role models and then also pay it forward. I've been very blessed. Funny enough, all my mentors have been men. All the people that have given me a chance have been men, and really amazing men in my life through my career. Two specifically, one with the Israeli underwear company, and then the owner of the Israeli packaging company, who was my before he passed was my mentor for 17 years. He gave me so many chances in my life, and um, you always have to thank the people that have given you opportunity. So the guy that ran the underwear company that gave me my first shot in sales, which led me to everything I do, which ties to logistics. Um, I called him recently before the situation now, but I guess it was 6 months ago, 7 months ago, and I said, and I embarrassed him. It was during Pesach. He was in the car with family, and I'm like, I know you're not going to like what I'm going to say, and I'm going to embarrass you, but I want to thank you for giving me my career, for doing everything and changing my life. He didn't know what to do with that. He's not that type of guy. And then the owner of the company that I worked for 17 years, he knew how I felt about him. Um, but his wife, I still call because sometimes, like, I hear him in my head when I'm in a really tough situation. I always think of him, and then I call his wife and say, everything I learned was because of your husband. And there are other people during your day. Like it's very important the people that work under you that you thank. And I'm a tough boss. Like I used to be a yeller. I've learned that not to yell, but I always thank people. Like or we just had a big success. We won a business. So I made sure to go back and thank the woman that prepared the quote for the customer. I just said, by the way, we got it. Thank you. And I'm teaching my sales team to do the same. Like, I think you always have to thank the people you work with. You always have to thank your suppliers. So we have a vendor now that did something nice. And I asked if I can post on LinkedIn how great they are to help them get more business. So even though if you go into purchasing and you're buying stuff, always build a solid and respectful relationship with your suppliers. When I was younger, I wasn't always like that. One supplier said, I don't want to work with you anymore. And I was like, wow. And then that humbled me to the ground. And I'm like, I will never be that person again. And I changed to work from a tough guy attitude or tough woman attitude to more of a partnership and a respect. And I think you get a lot more and you feel better about yourself. So
Yeah, that makes sense. That's some really good advice, and I'm glad that you were able to meet one of the lady from Puerto Rico who ran that factory. That's really cool as well.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of all the questions I have. Thank you so much, and thank you for all of your advice and for meeting with me for my podcast. I really appreciate it, and it's really cool to hear some of like your stories from like your work experience as well.
Well, I'm happy to do it, and good luck getting this done. And again, if you need anything else, let me know.
Thank you again to Mrs. Gurland for sitting down with me and discussing global supply chain and sharing some of her experiences with procuring supplies for global companies, working in a manufacturing facility, and being a woman in supply chain, along with how to succeed as being a woman in supply chain. For more episodes and sit downs, you can visit my podcast page, Stephanie's Supply Chain Sit Downs on Spotify. Thank you for listening and see you in the next episode.